a recent intelligence briefing. It meticulously analyzes the current month-end posture of several Eastern European states. We're specifically looking at how they are managing really a sustained multi-domain security situation across defense, economy, and mobility. The sheer discipline documented in this material, it raises a fundamental question that I think cuts across our analysis today. Does this observed, highly managed operational state represent a successful transition to a stable, manageable security equilibrium, where risk is contained and essentially normalized? Or does the constant, intense demand for perfect discipline, does it merely mask a deep, persistent, and frankly high-risk vulnerability? Now, I hold that the evidence presented overwhelmingly supports the view that these states have in fact successfully managed the transition. They've achieved a resilient and controllable baseline where these external security threats are now effectively factored in.
My perspective is quite different. Go ahead. I look at the operational reality detailed in this briefing and, well, I see a system that is stable only by the skin of its teeth, really. The constant resource-intensive maintenance required, I think, proves that the underlying environment remains inherently volatile and, frankly, unsustainable over the long term without some kind of pivot.
Well, let me start then. The briefing material, I think, offers compelling evidence for a mature defense posture. We see concrete success markers that demonstrate successful risk management. For instance, the report clearly notes no Allied airspace breaches overnight. Airport operations are consistently reported as ops normal. Now, this isn't luck. This is layered defense working exactly as intended. And beyond just the physical security successes, the economic picture reinforces this concept of baseline stability. Key regional currencies, the Polish zloty, PLN, the Hungarian forint, HUF, and the Romanian leu, RON, they're described as broadly range-bound. Now, this is significant because they are reacting more to broader EU prints, standard European economic reports, than to local security noise. When financial markets effectively discount these high-tension security events, that is a powerful indicator that the threat has been successfully incorporated into the business baseline. We also see professionalism in how funds are being allocated. Procurement is moving strategically. It's shifting from emergency one-offs to long-term framework contracts, even including things like penalties for late deliveries. This kind of strategic purchasing shows a smarter spend, signaling a measured long-term approach instead of, panic defensive reactions. This is the operational maturity we associate with treating a long-term challenge, much like the report's own analogy of managing winter ops. Slow, layered, disciplined.
Okay, I think that perspective, while it certainly appreciates the discipline involved, it fundamentally misinterprets the cost and the chronic nature of the threat. The surface calm you describe is entirely dependent on the continuous application of maximum resources. And that sheer necessity, for me, reveals a chronic vulnerability just underneath. Let's look closely at what the civilian infrastructure is forced to do. The reliance on degraded mode SOPs, standard operating procedures for systems running at reduced capacity, for both commercial aviation and ground trucking. Well, that's a critical alarm bell. Why? Because of regular short spoofing pockets, sunset to late evening, affecting electronic warfare, EW, and global navigation satellite systems, GNSS. This means essential civilian logistics are regularly compromised. They're forced to navigate using less reliable backup methods. That is not stability. That is active mitigation of daily disruption. And if we look at the military posture, the core measure of tension, the rules of engagement ROE, that very strict shoot if inside perimeter guideline is unchanged. This maintains maximum political and operational tension as the baseline state. That rigid deterrence is, well, it's the antithesis of a comfortable, manageable equilibrium. Finally, the threat is actively evolving. The constant need for operational upgrades, like these V1.2 detect, decide, defeat TTP trials for counter-UAS at critical rail hubs and airport perimeters, It proves that the current defensive structure is insufficient against new active threats. They are constantly playing catch-up, developing new tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, just to manage the next generation of hostile drones.
I see why you view this strict adherence to procedure as evidence of fragility. However, the report's emphasis on discipline over drama, I think, shows maturity in responding to a known threat. The very capability to maintain this strict, layered state is, in itself, the definition of control in a contested environment. The defenses, the layered combat air patrols, CAPS, and the steady quick reaction alert, QRA, and airborne warning and control system, AWAKES, they're not static. They are highly dynamic maintenance. The defense is holding the line. The sign-off summary explicitly states, quiet skies are a maintenance job, and the maintenance is holding. Doesn't the fact that they can maintain this high level of operational tempo day in and day out indicate a deeply ingrained, resilient system? One that's capable of absorbing routine external pressure?
But that stability is purely procedural, right? It's not inherent to the environment itself. I would argue that resilience only matters if the system can withstand minor procedural failures. The necessity for constant minute-by-minute desk GNSS discipline suggests that, well, a failure to maintain that vigilance risks immediate catastrophe. Look at how they manage information flow. Stakeholders now require crisp need-to-act pings. They've made a critical shift away from high volume of alerts to high clarity. This constraint flip highlights an operational tempo so demanding that non-essential or sort of slow drip intelligence is unusable. They're running a perpetual sprint, not a marathon. If the discipline has to be continuous, total, and non-negotiable, that indicates they cannot afford any margin for error, which by definition is a high-risk system.
If this were truly stable, the systems would have sufficient automated redundancy that human vigilance wouldn't have to be perfect all the time.
That strict operational tempo, however, must cost something. Let's move our focus now to how the economic data reflects this security burden. I maintain that the planning demonstrates long-term strategic commitment, dismissing the idea of panic spending. The conversion of what the report calls safe tranches, these security funding allocations, is focusing on strategic long-term assets. We're talking about new sensor arrays, short-range air defense, SHORAD systems, and, critically, long-term service level agreements, SLAs, for training and spares. This shows capacity building and sustainment is the priority, not just reacting to immediate defensive needs. They are professionalizing their capacity. The economic stability is allowing for a rational, strategic approach to modernization.
I see that data point, but I interpret it quite differently. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the economic stability is purely a sign of market confidence. While the method of procurement is professionalized, yes, absolutely, they're signing framework contracts. The list of priorities reveals where the real, non-discretionary money is going. We're talking about interceptors, drone kits, EW sets, and spares needed to maintain active combat readiness now. The economic stability you highlight is utterly contingent on continuous, massive, non-discretionary spending devoted almost entirely to countering current advanced security threats. This spending isn't optional capital investment. It's a required operational defense tax, essentially. Security is fundamentally driving the economic outflow, overriding normal market dynamics, regardless of how stable the FX prints might look on the front end. The economy isn't ignoring the threat, it's subsidizing the defense against it at enormous scale.
But if the spending was truly reactive, surely we would see a spike in FX volatility related to specific crisis events. We don't see that. The market seems to see this large defense spend as a fixed cost, a baseline feature of the environment now. That calculation suggests predictability, which I would argue is key to stability.
Predictability in spending doesn't equate to stability in security, though. It just means the cost of maintaining this high-risk equilibrium is predictable. That's different.
Okay, let's shift then to the issue of mobility and logistics adaptation, which I believe is strong evidence for operational control. The logistics system is demonstrating resilience. Crossings into Belarus, for example, are reported as near normal. requiring only a small operational buffer of, plus 10, 20 minutes. Humanitarian lanes along the Ukraine corridors are described as stable. This proves that even critical cross-border logistics are adapting effectively. They have the maturity now to develop specific NOTAM, notice-to-air missions, playbooks ready for predicted strike tempo blips. The system is adapting effectively across the macro layer.
That's a compelling argument regarding the stability of the macro layer. I'll grant you that. But let's look at the edge cases the briefing specifically flags. These aren't minor operational footnotes. They highlight how instability manifests at the human level. The briefing explicitly notes spoofing overlap with medevac and debris false alarms in low-density areas. These are not minor logistical hiccups that a 20-minute border buffer solves. They represent fundamental vulnerabilities where the constant, low-level conflict, UAVs, EW hotspots, directly impedes critical humanitarian operations. When GNSS advisories and NOTAM timing are constantly being challenged to the point where they interfere with medical transport flights, you are illustrating profound, immediate instability at the micro layer. It demonstrates an inability to fully isolate critical services from the conflict environment, proving that the resilience you champion is perhaps fragile at the points of greatest human need.
But even those edge cases are being analyzed and proceduralized. The fact that they are flagged in the report with specific response protocols being developed for them shows they're being integrated into the broader disciplined response framework. The system is adaptive, not brittle. Adaptation is a form of control.
I agree that the analysis is robust, yes. But the fact that these critical life-saving operations are now considered a routine edge case that requires constant procedural mitigation, well, that just underscores the severity of the threat environment for me. This is a highly managed, yes, but chronically compromised security state.
So, summing up my position, the data, when viewed through the lens of strategic depth and planning, supports the conclusion that Eastern Europe has established a resilient defense and economic framework. While threats certainly persist, the commitment to rigorous discipline and the layered strategic approach, from maintaining robust air patrols down to signing highly professionalized procurement contracts, means the security situation is contained and predictable. It is undeniably a demanding equilibrium, but the evidence confirms it is manageable and controlled.
In my reading of the evidence, reveals a high-risk system that is barely contained by constant, massive operational strictures. The continued reliance on degraded mode SOPs for civil functions, the unchanged maximum tension rules of engagement, and the active evolution of the threat landscape, which forces new counter-UAS TTP development almost monthly, suggests that this current state of quiet is merely the calmest possible operational mode within an inherently volatile and vulnerable system. To maintain this stability, you require absolute perfection in discipline and resources, which to my mind makes it inherently fragile.
We have analyzed this month-end posture through two very different lenses. One focusing on the strategic control achieved through resource commitment and mature planning, and the other focusing on the staggering procedural rigor and vulnerability exposed by the necessity of that control.
It seems the source material demands a complex view where discipline and risk are ultimately two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. And it's really up to the listener to weigh whether the control achieved is worth the resource commitment and the constant low-level vulnerability exposed by it all.